He believed he had lost his power. She believed she had never had any. And that is exactly where this tragedy begins. In this story, Pearl is not merely forced into marriage with a fallen mafia heir, and Jericho is not merely a broken man in a wheelchair. He is the ruin left behind by violence. And she is the child shaped by years of emotional cruelty. What makes this so devastating is not the contract between them, but the fact that both are products of worlds that only know how to wound before they ever learn how to love.
They called her a burden, a monster, totally useless. And there Pearl was, frozen solid. Her own mother stalks toward her, heels clicking like a death clock, counting down to her execution. The verdict? Nobody wants you, so you're marrying the cripple. Meanwhile, Dad's in the corner having a total meltdown, and her sister's soaking up the sun with a smug grin like she just dodged a bullet. At 27, Pearl's fate was sealed. She's getting hitched to Jericho Crane, the one name that puts the fear of God into all of Las Vegas, the absolute boss of Sin City. This dude used to run the underworld, but now he's been stuck in a wheelchair for 14 months because his enemies blew up his ride. Get this, he was supposed to marry Pearl's sister, but she bailed the second he couldn't walk. So now Pearl's the replacement, a throwaway pawn in some big power play, but her family has no clue. Pearl's got a secret superpower nobody would ever guess. She sees sound as color. Every word, every breath, every heartbeat shows up like a light show. And a lie that shows up as pure, inky black. Truth glows like a cool blue jade. Hatred burns a nasty dried blood red. And right then, her mom's voice was just a black hole of nothingness. For 27 years, that's all Pearl ever saw. She thought that was it for her until she met him. The guy everyone abandoned. The dude locked away in a dark room, pushing everyone away. But his voice was something else entirely. And what she saw in it was about to change everything for them both. Drop a "Protect Pearl" in the comments if you're Team Pearl. And you better subscribe and hit that bell, 'cause this story is about to get wild. Flash forward 3 days, and Pearl's at the penthouse doors of the Crane Casino. The wedding dress her mom picked is squeezing the life out of her, seams screaming for mercy. Total power move. Constance chose a dress 2 sizes too small, just one last twisted way to say Pearl deserved nothing. The head of security, Knox Mercer, opens the doors and waves her in. He's got a total poker face, but his voice has a pale gray tint. Completely neutral, not friendly, not mean. Inside, the place is a cave. Thick black curtains block out all the Vegas sunlight. A few weak lamps give off a sickly yellow glow like dying candles. The air is so cold it gives Pearl instant goosebumps, and it smells like old wood and booze. Right in the middle, facing away from her, is a matte black wheelchair, not moving an inch. The guy in it doesn't even bother to look. Next to him is Eleanor Crane, his mom, with a sharp platinum haircut and eyes like steel, sizing Pearl up from top to bottom. She doesn't say a word, but her stare makes it clear she's judging Pearl like a piece of furniture. Jericho doesn't turn around. He's talking to some suit, probably a lawyer, in this dead, flat voice. Can she even sign her name? Or do I need to get a stamp? And boom, Pearl sees the color. It was a nasty, muddy gray, not evil black, not angry red, just this dull, foggy gray, like smoke disappearing or a ghost just giving up. And in that second, she gets it. This guy isn't a monster. He's rotting from the inside out. Without thinking, Pearl blurts out, "Your voice is a muddy gray, like someone locked in a windowless room?" And the whole room just freezes. The lawyer's hands stop midair. Eleanor's face twists up. Knox sucks in a breath. And Jericho Crane, for the first time in 14 months, is completely stunned into silence. The wheelchair turns, slow and dramatic. And for the first time, Pearl sees his face. It's all sharp angles with cheekbones looking hollow from losing weight. His stormy eyes are glued to her, not even blinking. A thin scar runs from his temple to his cheek like a crack in a statue. Pearl thinks he must have been a total knockout before, the dangerous kind of handsome. But all that pain has worn him down into something broken. "And who are you?" Jericho asks, his voice low and controlled. Pearl doesn't even blink. "The woman you're being forced to marry." The silence is thick enough to cut. Eleanor tries to jump in, but Jericho just holds up a hand and shuts her down. He stares at Pearl for a few long seconds, his gray eyes drilling into her, trying to figure her out. Then he turns to the table, his voice like ice. "Get on with it. I don't have all day." The whole ceremony is over in less than 10 minutes. No music, no flowers, no rings. Eleanor says they'll get them later, which Pearl knows is a total lie. The lawyer just reads off some papers. Pearl signs her name. Jericho scribbles his without even looking. And just like that, it's a done deal. Pearl Whitmore is gone, and Pearl Crane is born, stuck in a dark room with people who hate her guts. The second he signs, Jericho spins his chair and just leaves. No goodbye, no nothing. Eleanor trails right after him, leaving Pearl all alone while the lawyer packs up and Knox watches the door. Pearl sees Jericho's shadow disappear, that same muddy gray color following him like the tail of a dying star. That night, she's taken to the Crane Mansion. It's this slick, modern fortress on a hill over Vegas, all glass and steel. And the security here is even crazier than at the casino. Cameras are everywhere. Guards are on patrol all night long. Pearl gets led to the master suite, which is as big as the whole attic she used to live in. There's a giant bed with silk sheets, a fancy chandelier, and a walk-in closet bigger than her old room. But it's freezing, a deep-down cold that has nothing to do with the temperature. And Jericho is MIA. The only person who talks to her is Nina Sanos, the housekeeper, a sweet woman with kind eyes. She explains that the boss hasn't left his private room since the accident, telling Pearl not to take it personally and that things will get better. Nina's voice is a soft, light blue, the color of genuine kindness, no hidden agenda at all. Pearl thanks her and says she's fine, which is true. She got used to being abandoned a long, long time ago. At midnight, Pearl can't sleep. The room's too big, too quiet, just too weird. She gets up, throws on a robe, and starts exploring. The hallways go on forever, full of pricey art and creepy statues. She passes by all these empty, dark rooms that feel like a closed museum. Then, at the end of one wing, she finds it. An old wooden door, way older than anything else. Paint's chipping off and the lock is all worn out. This is the only door that looks like it's been sealed for ages. Pearl presses her ear against it and hears something. A tiny whisper, like a sigh. Like the whole room is just waiting for someone. So the next night, she returns with a hairpin. Turns out she learned to pick locks from online videos back when she was trapped in the attic. You know, whenever her mom locked her in so she wouldn't ruin her sister's parties. After a little work, the old lock clicks open. The door creaks like it's ancient, and Pearl slides in. The room is pitch black and dusty. A little moonlight sneaks through a window, lighting up a massive shape in the middle of the room. Pearl gets closer and yanks off the dusty cover. Underneath is a black Steinway grand piano. It's covered in a thick layer of dust, but the piano itself is perfect, totally gorgeous, like some sleeping beauty waiting for a kiss to wake it up. Pearl reaches out, her fingers trembling as she touches the keys. She presses one down. A single note rings out, and in front of her eyes, color explodes. Pure gold, bright and warm like a summer sunrise. It's the first time in forever she's seen that color. The first time in forever she's played, her fingers just start moving and the music flows out of her like a flash flood. With every single note, Pearl's world just vanished. Time stopped ticking. The fancy room, the sham of a marriage, all of it just dissolved into the music. She had no clue the estate's spy cam network was recording the whole show. And she definitely didn't know that in a dark room, Jericho Crane was watching. For 14 months, his face was a stone mask, but now something cracked. Knox, his guy, walks in and asks, "Want me to make her stop?" A long pause hangs in the air before Jericho finally speaks, his voice way deeper than before. "No, let her play." Knox couldn't even hide his shock. For 14 straight months, nothing got through to the boss. Not his empire, not his family, not even life or death. He was just a ghost in a dark room, waiting for it all to end. But tonight, something cut through the static. Something made him actually listen. Jericho stared at the screen, at this woman who was his wife, and had no idea why her music made the suffocating void in his chest feel a tiny bit lighter. From then on, Jericho became a secret spectator on the cameras. Whenever Pearl played, he said nothing to nobody. He didn't know why. All he knew was her music made the endless nights survivable, a relief he hadn't felt for 14 months. On day 5 of the marriage, a summons arrived from the Queen Bee. Eleanor Crane. The housekeeper, Lena Santos, showed up looking worried, saying the madam wanted a word. Pearl just gave a nod, no questions, no fear. After 27 years under Constance Whitmore's abuse, she was used to being called in for a verbal beatdown. Eleanor was richer and scarier, but the game was the same. Her study was up on the 2nd floor west wing. The room was a pit of dark wood and deep red velvet that just ate the light. Pricey perfume mixed with the smell of old leather chairs. Behind a black desk sat Eleanor, back straight as a board, her steel gray eyes locked on Pearl the second she walked in. She didn't offer a seat. Pearl wasn't expecting one. She stood in front of the desk, hands at her sides, and just waited. Eleanor stayed quiet for a long moment, drumming her fingers on the wood. Then she opened a drawer and put a freaking firearm on the desk. She didn't point it at Pearl. She just set it down, the black metal shining cold under the lamp. Pearl just stared at the weapon. No flinch, no gasp, not a single tremble. She looked at it like it was a paperweight. A corner of Eleanor's mouth twitched up. "This is a reminder of who's in charge. You don't need to be scared. You just need to understand." Pearl nodded. "I understand." To Pearl, Eleanor's voice was the color of steel gray. Not the black rage of Constance, but the cold, logical color of a person without feelings. The color of someone who moves pawns on a board, using them up without love or hate. Eleanor cut right to the chase. "You are here for one reason, to give the Crane family an heir." This wasn't news to Pearl. She figured as much. Jericho was the only heir, and after his accident, the family's legacy was on the line. Eleanor needed a grandkid to lock down the Crane dynasty and protect her empire. "I'm giving you 6 months," Eleanor said, her voice like a business contract. 6 months to get pregnant. Pull it off, and you'll live in insane luxury. She paused, her eyes drilling into Pearl's. But if there's no baby after 6 months, then the Whitmore family is going to run into problems. A whole lot of them. Pearl knew exactly what that meant. Her weakling father was the only person who'd ever actually loved her. Eleanor was using Gerald as a hostage. It was a classic power move, something Pearl had seen a million times. Leaning back, Eleanor waited for her to fold. She'd seen tougher people break. Nobody said no to the Cranes, but Pearl didn't back down. She met Eleanor's gaze and said in a dead, calm voice, "I cannot do that." Dead silence. For the first time, Eleanor actually blinked, a flash of surprise on her face. "What was that?" "I cannot do what you're asking," Pearl said again. "It's not about wanting to, it's about being able to." Eleanor's brow tightened. Her eyes got darker. "Are you refusing me?" Pearl took a breath, getting her facts straight. "I have a condition. When someone touches me without real affection, I hear glass shattering inside my head. The pain is insane." Eleanor went still, her gaze sharpening, trying to see if it was a bluff. Pearl continued, "If your son and I did anything without love, that sound would just be on a loop." She paused, her voice steady. "I would literally be driven insane, and an insane woman can't carry a child or raise one." Eleanor was now looking at Pearl in a whole new way. It wasn't hate or pity, but this sharp curiosity, like a predator finding some creature it's never seen. "So you're saying you're crazy?" "No," Pearl corrected her. "I'm just different, the same way your son is different now after his accident." The whole vibe in the room changed. Eleanor was quiet for a long time, her fingers tapping a slower, more calculating beat. Finally, she stood up, grabbed the firearm, and put it back in the drawer. 6 months, Eleanor said, her voice still cold, but with something new in it. "I'll give you 6 months to fix this little problem of yours. How you do it is on you." Pearl nodded and turned to leave. As she touched the doorknob, Eleanor spoke again. "And Miss Whitmore, next time you're called, you will knock." Pearl didn't even look back. She opened the door, slipped out, and closed it quietly. Alone, Eleanor stared at the door, her lips barely moving. "This one is not as simple as I thought." That night, Pearl's playing was an absolute storm. The music was a waterfall, a hurricane, the scream of her soul that had been locked up for years. She played the music she was never allowed to touch. Melodies her mother said were too intense, too raw, too much for the daughter she wanted to keep in a cage. In his room on the west side, Jericho sat glued to the screen. He knew right away that something had happened to her. Her music tonight wasn't the quiet whisper from before. It was a raw scream of pain. Jericho didn't know why. But for the first time in 14 months, he felt a flicker of curiosity about someone else. A change was starting inside him, so small that even he didn't notice it yet. On the 10th night, Pearl was at the Steinway, same as always. A little bit of moonlight sliced through the curtains, hitting the black and white keys like dust. She was playing something sad, notes dropping into the quiet like raindrops. When the music room door just swung open, Pearl stopped, turning her head. It was Jericho Crane in his matte black wheelchair, a hand on the wheel, his gray eyes locked right on her. He had rolled himself here, no warning, no help. For the first time since the wedding, they were completely alone in the same room. Pearl said nothing, just watched him, waiting. Jericho was quiet too, his eyes scanning the dusty room before landing back on her. The silence got so loud, Pearl could hear her own heart freaking out. Then he spoke, his voice a low rasp like it hadn't been used in forever. "What do you see when you hear my voice?" The question didn't surprise her. Maybe he heard her talking to his mom, or maybe he was just curious. She had no reason to lie. "Muddy gray," she answered, her voice soft. "Like a thick fog, like cigarette smoke vanishing into the cold night. You're drowning in something I can't name." A short, sharp laugh from Jericho cut through the room. "Drowning," he echoed, his voice tasting like old booze. "I died 14 months ago, Miss Whitmore. This thing is just the part that forgot to stop breathing." Pearl looked at him, the muddy gray clinging to him like a permanent fog. She didn't offer any of the fake platitudes people always did, that it gets better, that he's strong. She'd heard those empty words too many times. Instead, she just said what she saw. "There is a sliver of another color in your voice, buried deep, almost swallowed by the gray. I can't quite see what it is yet." Jericho was totally still, his gray eyes on her with a look Pearl couldn't read. "What color?" he asked, his voice now a low whisper. "I don't know," Pearl admitted. "It's too weak, but it's there. You're not as gone as you think you are." No one had ever spoken to him like that. For 14 months, he'd gotten pity, fear, or people trying to fix him like a broken toy. But Pearl did none of that. She just said what she saw, and wanted nothing. Jericho watched her for a long time before asking another question. "So, why the secret jam sessions at night?" Pearl's fingers ghost over the piano keys. "Because daylight playing is a no-go. My own mother said my music sounded like a cat getting strangled. She shut it all down when I was just 14. Jericho stays silent, but his eyes go dark. He knows that kind of wound, having the one thing you love snatched away, the thing that makes you feel alive. Before his accident, he was untouchable. Now just walking across a room leaves him breathless. "Play," he says, his voice way softer now. "I won't shut you down." Pearl locks eyes with him for a second before turning back to the piano. And she plays. The music just floods the room again, with brilliant gold literally flashing in her eyes. Jericho doesn't even twitch. He just sits there in the shadows, her one-man audience until the sun comes up. He says nothing. He just exists. And Pearl, for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, doesn't feel alone. 2 weeks later, after Nana Pinky swears she'll have privacy, Pearl calls her dad. Gerald Whitmore's face pops up, looking thinner than she remembers. His gray-blue eyes, just like hers, are rocking some serious dark circles. His shirt's a mess. His hair is wild. He's obviously hiding out in his little music shop, his only escape from Constance. "Are you okay?" Gerald asks right off the bat, his voice thick with anxiety. "Are they cool to you? Anyone giving you grief?" A tiny smile plays on Pearl's lips. "I'm fine, Father. No one's messing with me." In her vision, her voice is a weak, washed-out blue. It's not the whole truth, but it's not a complete lie either. She's been not okay for so long, it's basically her default setting now. Gerald just stares at her, some unreadable emotion flickering in his eyes. Then he leans in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Pearl, I have to tell you something. For the last 10 years, I've been secretly recording you playing piano." Pearl freezes up. "What?" "Every single time you played in the middle of the night." "I recorded it," Gerald confesses, his voice shaking. "I sent those tapes to producers, to fancy schools, to literally anyone who could give you a different life. I wanted to give you an out. You see, even with your mother's ban, even with her silencing you, I wanted you to have a shot." Tears just start pouring down Pearl's face, and she can't stop them. For 27 years in that house, she felt like a ghost, thinking nobody cared about her passion or saw her potential. But her father saw it all. For 10 long years, he was her secret agent, collecting every shred of hope for her future without saying a word. To Pearl, Gerald's voice is pure turquoise, the color of a ride-or-die parent, of quiet sacrifice, a color she's rarely ever seen. "Don't you dare let anyone kill your music, you hear me?" Gerald says, his voice cracking. "Not me, not even that husband of yours. Don't let them take what's yours." Pearl nods, the tears still coming. "I hear you, Father." Gerald takes a deep breath. "I'm gonna find a way to get to you. I swear on it. This time, my silent era is over." "Don't do anything to make Mother mad," Pearl begs, suddenly more worried about him than herself. "I have been quiet for 27 years, Gerald shoots back, his tone harder than she's ever heard it. "That's long enough." The call ends. Pearl sits there in the quiet room, her face still wet. She thinks about her dad, a decade of secret recordings, a love that was never spoken but always proven. That night, Pearl plays right through her tears. The music is a tragic, beautiful melody, like winter rain on a roof, like a whisper of long dead dreams. In a room on the west side of the mansion, Jericho sits in front of a screen and watches her entire breakdown. He sees the tears, the shake in her shoulders, how her fingers keep moving even while she's sobbing, and for the first time in 14 months, Jericho Crane actually wants to understand why someone else is in pain. A month had passed since he first walked into that music room. He'd been back plenty of nights, sitting in the dark and just listening. They barely talked, but the silence between them went from super awkward to something softer, like two strangers sharing an umbrella, slowly getting used to the other being there. Then Eleanor Crane dropped the hammer. Jericho would be at the casino's annual charity auction. This was the biggest social event of the year for the Cranes, a night where all of Las Vegas high society got together to flex their money behind a fake charity smile. For 14 months, Jericho had been a total ghost. Rumors were flying that he was dead, nuts, or unfit to run the Crane empire. Eleanor was about to shut that talk down. "People are saying you're dead," she told him that morning, her voice pure ice. "You will prove them wrong." Jericho did not want to go. Pearl saw it in the way his knuckles went white on his chair, the clench of his jaw, the way his gray aura got thicker. But he didn't fight Eleanor. He never did. It wasn't fear, it was just a level of exhaustion that had no energy left for another battle. Nina Santos helped Pearl get ready. The dress was a turquoise, off-the-shoulder number that hugged her tight before flowing down. For once, Pearl wore something genuinely stunning, something that fit her perfectly instead of pinching her or hanging off her like a burial shroud. Na styled her hair up, showing off her neck, and clipped on some small emeralds. "You look like a new woman," Na said with a warm smile. "No," Pearl told her own reflection. "I am still me. It's just that for once, someone allowed me to be beautiful." When Pearl came down to the grand hall, Jericho was there, waiting in his wheelchair. He was rocking a tailored black suit, his hair perfect, but his gray eyes were as dark as an oncoming storm. He watched her walk down the staircase, his gaze stuck on the turquoise dress, on her bare shoulders, on the curve of her neck. He didn't say a word, but the murky gray around him seemed to pull back just a little. Pearl stopped in front of him and met his eyes. "Your voice has a pale red tint tonight," she said softly. "You're afraid." Jericho scowled, his jaw tightening. I am not afraid." "Color does not lie," Pearl shot back, her voice even. A tense silence fell between them. Then Jericho sighed, his shoulders dropping just a tiny bit. "I don't want them looking at me like I'm some broken thing," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "I was the man they feared. Now I am the one they pity." Pearl paused, then said, "Then don't look at them." Jericho lifted his eyes to hers. "Look at me," Pearl said. "If you need a place to look that isn't them, then look at me." Jericho was quiet, but his gray eyes stayed on her face longer than usual. He gave the tiniest nod and motioned for Knox to wheel him to the car. The grand ballroom of Crane Casino was blindingly bright when they rolled in. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the crazy high ceiling. Hundreds of people in sparkly outfits crammed the hall. Champagne was flowing like a river, and some jazz band was playing in the corner. Then Jericho Crane appeared in his black wheelchair, and for a hot second, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. The whispers followed. Pearl felt all of them, not with her ears, but as waves of color. A gross gray curiosity, a sharp green envy, streaks of black hate hiding behind fake smiles, and the pale, insulting red of fake pity. "Who is that with him?" "That's not Jasmine, is it?" one voice asked. "I heard Jasmine ditched him right after his accident. This must be the substitute?" Those words were a slick, poisonous black, a special kind of cruel only the rich can manage. Pearl didn't even flinch. She'd been dealing with words like that her entire life. But she saw Jericho start drinking way too fast, the murky gray aura around him coiling like a thundercloud. He was starting to fray. With a fake smile and practiced grace, Eleanor made the introductions. Pearl barely heard them. She was locked on Jericho, on the death grip he had on his glass, the hard set of his jaw every time someone gave him the pity eyes. And then she sensed a new color, a deep and threatening red. This wasn't the pale red of fear or the bruised color of hate. This was the dark red of dried blood, the color of a life or death threat coming from somewhere high above. Pearl's eyes shot upward, scanning the second-floor balcony, the giant windows, the soaring ceiling, and its glittery chandelier. And there it was, a tiny crimson dot, almost invisible, drifting across the ballroom floor. A laser sight, and it was closing in on Jericho. It all went down in a flash. There was no time to think, no time to scream a warning. Pure instinct took over. Pearl lunged, slamming her hands against Jericho's wheelchair and sending it spinning violently to the side. The crack of a gunshot shattered the air, a nasty sound that ripped right through the music and chatter. The bullet tore through the exact spot Jericho was in a split second before, hitting the wall behind him with a splintering thud. But Pearl wasn't in the clear. She felt a white-hot pain rip through her left shoulder, igniting her whole body like a forest fire. She crumpled to the floor as a dark crimson stain bloomed across her turquoise gown. All hell broke loose. Screams echoed. Tables flipped. Champagne glasses shattered. The lights flickered, then went bright. Security swarmed in from everywhere, Knox yelling orders into his radio. And boom! Pearl hits the floor. Jericho sees the red soaking her dress, her face going ghost white from the blood loss. "Pearl!" he screams, his voice cracking through the chaos. Check this. It's the first time he's ever said her name. Not Miss Whitmore, just Pearl. He tries to reach her, but his chair's too far back. As he fumbles, the medical team swarms her. Knox reports the sniper was found, took himself out before they could grab him. No clues. Jericho doesn't hear a word. His world just shrank to Pearl, her blood and her eyelids fluttering shut. Bring her to the estate, he commands, his voice pure ice until the last word shatters. My personal doctor, no hospital, he's the only one who touches her. Knox fires back. Sir, she needs a hospital now. No one touches her, Jericho roars, and the entire ballroom goes dead silent. For 14 months, nobody has heard Jericho Crane even raise his voice. He's been a complete statue. But tonight, for the girl bleeding out, he became a volcano. As medics get her on a stretcher, Jericho snatches her hand. It's cold, way too pale, but he won't let go. He holds it the entire ride back, eyes locked on her unconscious face. For the first time in 14 months, Jericho Crane prayed. Pearl's eyes fluttered open to a plain white ceiling. The pain in her shoulder was a dull fire, smothered by the drugs dripping from the IV. She blinked, the room's soft light coming into focus. This was not her bedroom. This was the Crane Estate's private med wing, with its sterile bed, beeping monitor, and the sharp, clean smell of antiseptic. Then she saw him. Jericho sat in his wheelchair right next to her bed. He was still in last night's black suit, now creased and spotted with dark, dried stains. Deep, dark circles bruised the skin under his gray eyes. A rough shadow of stubble was on his jaw. He looked like a man who hadn't slept at all. And it hit her with a shock. He never left. From the second she fell until right now, he'd been a silent guard at her side. Jericho saw she was awake. His gaze locked onto hers, and in his eyes was something she'd never seen. Not coldness, but a twisted knot of worry, fear, and a furious, barely contained anger. Why would you do that? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. It took Pearl a second to get what he meant. Then the memory hit her like a truck. The red laser dot, the gunshot, the white-hot agony. I saw red, she answered, her voice weak. I knew it was danger. Jericho just stared, his jaw tight. You could have been killed. I know. A heavy silence dropped between them, the only sound the steady beat of the heart monitor. He looked at her like she was some impossible math problem he couldn't figure out. Why? He asked again, his voice almost a whisper. You owe me nothing. This marriage was forced. You should despise me. Pearl thought about it, her mind still fuzzy from the meds. Lying was a skill she'd never picked up. She had never learned how. So she just gave him the truth. I don't despise you, she said softly. Your voice. It doesn't have the color of hatred. Jericho went quiet, his gray eyes churning like a stormy ocean as he stared at her. And Pearl could feel a change in him. The heavy gray was still there, but it was thinning out, letting a color through she'd only seen a hint of before. Then Jericho did something he hadn't done for anyone since his accident. He reached out and took her hand. His own was warm and strong, but he couldn't hide the slight tremble. He held her hand like he was terrified she'd disappear. Thank you, he breathed, his voice unsteady. Thank you for saving my life. And then Pearl saw it, clear as day for the very first time. Turquoise, as bright as the ocean in the sun. It poured from his voice, from that raw, honest gratitude. It was the color of truth, of real emotion, still new and fragile. Your voice just changed its color, Pearl whispered, a small smile on her lips, even though her shoulder still burned. I can see it, Jericho frowned. What color? A beautiful one, she replied. One I have never seen from you. He didn't say anything else, but he never let go of her hand. They stayed like that, in total silence, until the meds pulled Pearl back to sleep. Days later, Pearl's wound was closing up and she could finally sit. Jericho was in his study next to the med room when his phone buzzed. Knox handed it to him, clearly annoyed. Miss Jasmine Whitmore. Jericho stared at the name, his jaw tightening into a solid rock. 14 months. 14 months since she had bolted from the hospital the day doctors said he might be crippled forever. 14 months of absolute nothing, like he'd never existed in her life. He answered the call. Jericho! Jasmine's voice dripped like honey and poison. I heard about the attack. I was frantic with worry. I need to see you. A cold, empty laugh came out of Jericho's mouth. 14 months of nothing, and now you're worried. Silence crackled over the line. Then Jasmine's voice came back, lower, slick with the fake apology he knew so well. I was wrong. I know, but I can fix this. We can try again, Jericho. I never stopped loving you. I have a wife, Jericho stated flatly, his voice stripped of all warmth. A sharp, ugly laugh echoed through the phone. Her? She's the replacement, Jericho. Everybody knows that. A pathetic little thing my mother threw away. Do you really think she is worthy of you? Jericho paused for a second. Then he spoke. His voice was like frost. That replacement just took a bullet for me. It was meant for my head, and she put herself in front of it. She nearly died for me. He let the words hang there. And what did you do when I was in a hospital bed, not knowing if I'd ever walk again? Oh, that's right. You fled. Only silence answered him. Jericho ended the call, not even waiting for her to reply. In the medical room, Pearl heard everything. The wall wasn't thick, and Jericho's voice carried. She lay completely still, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a feeling she couldn't even name. With a few simple words, he had made his choice. To the world, she might always be the stand-in, but in that moment, to Jericho Crane, she was more. She was the one who had used her own body as his shield. And that one act changed the entire game. A few minutes later, Jericho wheeled his chair into the infirmary with Knox trailing him like a shadow. His eyes met Pearl's, a question hanging in the air between them. She just stayed silent. Some things don't need words. Jericho's eyes never left Pearl as he gave orders to Knox. Lock this place down, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nobody steps on this estate unless I clear them. Knox gave one sharp nod. And wherever Miss Whitmore goes, Jericho added, his tone absolute, I go. She will not leave my sight. Pearl met his stare, and for the first time she felt safe. Not like some prize, but like a person whose life mattered. Then, in the 4th month of their marriage, on a random afternoon, the whole world tilted. Constance and Jasmine Whitmore just appeared at the gates. Pearl was in the drawing room with Jericho when Nina announced them, but before she could even ask who, the doors swung open. 2 women walked in like they owned the place. Jasmine, poured into a scorching red dress, her blonde hair perfect, led the charge, her heels clicking like a countdown to disaster. Constance followed, dressed in fancy cream and pearls, a fake smile glued to her face, acting like she was here for tea instead of to ruin a life. Pearl jumped to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shot a look at Knox, whose face was a storm cloud by the door. How did they get past security? Mrs. Eleanor countermanded the order, Knox said, his voice tight. There was nothing I could do. The cold truth hit Pearl's stomach. Eleanor Crane was still moving her chess pieces, trying to swap Pearl out for the perfect daughter-in-law she always wanted. We came to see our dear daughter, Constance cooed, her voice like sweet poison. But Pearl could see the darkness dripping from every word. We understand she's thriving here. We had to see it for ourselves. Jasmine ignored Pearl completely. Her eyes were only on Jericho, her face breaking into a huge smile, wiping away 14 months of total silence. Jericho, she purred, her voice spun from pure sugar. I heard you are recovering so well, I am just overjoyed. Pearl saw the color of that voice and felt sick. It was a greasy, shimmering black, a lie from start to finish, without a single speck of honesty in it. Jericho just looked back at Jasmine with eyes as cold as a winter frost. The man was a stone wall. No expression, no reaction, nothing. He just watched her, his dead-eyed stare making her feel like a bug on a windshield. Constance stepped up beside her daughter, that fake smile never slipping. Jericho, let's cut to the chase, she said, acting all logical. This was a transaction. Jasmine was the main deal, Pearl was just the seat filler. Now Jasmine's back, so it's time for an upgrade. Pay Pearl off and send her packing. It's better for everyone. The entire drawing room went dead quiet. Pearl didn't move, just watched her mother sell her off a second time, like a defective product being returned for a better one. A truly garbage feeling she'd known for 27 years. But this time was different. I have a wife. Jericho's voice finally sliced the silence, colder than steel. Jasmine let out a sharp, ugly laugh. Her, she scoffed, giving Pearl a look of pure disgust. She's the understudy, Jericho. Everyone knows it. The girl nobody wanted. You can't seriously pick her over me. The words were like knives, but Pearl didn't bow her head. She didn't back down. She didn't bolt like she had for the last 27 years of her life. Instead, she calmly stepped forward, planting herself like a shield in front of Jericho. That's right, she confirmed, her voice dead steady. I am the replacement. Jasmine's eyes flashed with victory, but Pearl wasn't done. But I'm the replacement who took a bullet for him, she said, staring Jasmine down. It was aimed at his head. I jumped in front of it. I almost died for him. And where were you? Absolute, suffocating silence filled the room. The smirk on Jasmine's face vanished. Oh, right, Pearl continued, her tone level, each word a perfectly aimed shot. You bailed. The instant the doctors said he might be paralyzed, you were gone. 14 months with no calls, no texts, nothing, all because you couldn't stand the idea of pushing a wheelchair. You were scared of the pity, scared of getting dragged down with him. Jasmine's face went pale. Her mouth hung open, completely silent. I wasn't scared, Pearl declared, her voice sharp and clear. I stayed. And you have nothing I want, because you gave up the only thing that mattered. You forfeited your spot 14 months ago when you walked out of that hospital and didn't look back. Constance tried to jump in, but Jericho's voice cut her off cold. Leave my home, he commanded, his words like breaking ice. Both of you, now, and don't ever return. Jericho, you can't. Knox, Jericho snapped, staring straight ahead. Show them out. If they ever set foot on this property or near a crane business again, make them understand the consequences. Knox moved immediately, motioning for the women to get out. Constance and Jasmine were shoved out like rats. Jasmine shot one last hateful look at Pearl, pure poison, but it didn't even touch her. She fought for herself and she won. When the heavy door clicked shut, Pearl's legs started to tremble. The adrenaline from the fight faded, leaving her feeling hollow. She was about to head to her room when his voice stopped her. Pearl. She looked over. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not just thanks, but something much deeper. "Tonight," he said, "in the music room, there's something I need to tell you." Later, Pearl sat at the massive piano, just staring at the keys, replaying the day's total chaos and her epic win in her head. The door opened. Pearl turned and saw Jericho wheeling himself inside, but he didn't stop in the corner like he usually did. He rolled right into the middle of the room, stopping just in front of her. "I have to tell you something," he said again, his voice sounding raw. Pearl just watched him and waited. Then he did something insane. Grabbing the wheels, he fought to push himself up with a raw grunt. His legs shook violently and his knees buckled. Sweat poured down his face, but he was doing it. He was standing on his own 2 feet. Pearl shot up, moving to catch him before she could even think. "Don't!" Jericho grunted out, the effort making him breathless. "I have to be standing for this." He swayed, his legs shaking hard, but he stayed up, his gray eyes locked onto hers, filled with a feeling she had never gotten from anyone in her life. "Pearl," he started, every word sounding like it was pulled from his soul. "I love you." Silence. "I don't know when it happened," he said, his voice trembling but honest. "Maybe when you insulted my voice, or when you played in the dark and I spied on you through the cameras like a creep. Maybe it was when you jumped in front of that gun for me. I love you and I want you to stay. Not for a contract, not for my mom, but just because I want you." His strength finally gave out. As his legs collapsed, Pearl lunged and caught him. They slid to the floor in a heap, Jericho breathing in ragged gasps against her. He leaned his head back, sweating, but his gray eyes were shining. "What color is my voice now?" he panted. Pearl looked right at him and saw it clearly. The murky gray was gone. In its place was shining gold with streaks of bright turquoise, like the ocean under a perfect sun. "Gold," she whispered, a smile finally appearing on her face. "With turquoise." "What does it mean?" "It means you're telling the truth," she said softly, "and that you're terrified of losing me." A laugh ripped out of Jericho's throat, a real, actual laugh, the first since the accident. It was rusty and rough, but it was 100% real. "I am terrified," he admitted. Pearl raised a hand to his face, tracing an old scar. "Don't be," she murmured. "I'm right here." And then she kissed him, a slow, gentle promise. In that moment, the sound of breaking glass was gone, replaced by the feeling of warm honey. For the first time ever, Pearl knew what it felt like to be truly loved. In the 2 months since they first kissed, her entire world had changed. That cold, lonely bedroom was a thing of the past. She now stayed in Jericho's room, comforted by the sound of his breathing at night. There was no rush between them. Jericho understood her strange ability, the sound of shattering glass from any touch without love. He was patient, letting her get used to him, proving every one of his touches was real. And bit by bit, the sound of breaking glass went away. Now, a warm, golden feeling surrounded her whenever he was close. Madame Lorraine showed up at this state late in the 6th month, looking happier than Pearl had ever seen her. "I have incredible news," she said, her eyes shining. "I got you an audition in Manhattan with the judges at Carnegie Hall." Pearl leapt to her feet, her heart pounding. Carnegie Hall was the ultimate goal for any pianist, where careers were made. "Pass this audition," Madame Lorraine continued, her voice turning serious, "and you will perform in Carnegie Hall's spring concert. An audience of thousands is waiting. It's a shot most musicians only dream about." Pearl looked at Jericho next to her. He squeezed her hand and smiled, his words feeling like pure gold. I'm going with you." The words shocked her. He hadn't left Las Vegas since the accident. "Jericho," she started, "you don't have to." "I want to," he cut in, his voice firm. "I am not going to miss this moment for you." A week before the audition, they were in New York. Jericho was now walking with the cane, his steps careful and full of pain. 6 months of brutal therapy and sheer willpower had gotten him out of his wheelchair. The wheelchair was still with them, a backup for when he got too tired, but he was mostly walking on his own. Their new place was a sick penthouse in Manhattan with a view of Central Park. Pearl poured all her time into her music, playing her audition piece until it was second nature. The night before the big day, she was still playing late when Jericho's hand gently stopped her. "You have to rest," he insisted. "Tomorrow's the day." Pearl knew he was right, but she couldn't sleep. She lay there in his arms, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the crazy road that had led her here. For 27 years, she was locked away, told she was nothing. And now she was about to own the stage at Carnegie Hall. The next day, just an hour before go time, Pearl was in the dressing room looking like $1,000,000. She was rocking a black gown, hair on point, makeup perfect. Lena Santos, who'd flown to New York to help, was out getting water. Jericho was right there, holding her hand, his quiet vibe a solid anchor. A knock and a server rolls in a cart with a teapot. "Hot tea from the organizers, ma'am," the woman mumbled, her head down like she was hiding something. "It's to help you chill out." Pearl said thanks, reaching for the pot, not giving the server a second look. She didn't spot the cheap brown wig over blonde hair, didn't see the ice-cold hate in the blue eyes under all that makeup. It happened in a flash. The server faked a stumble, and the boiling tea went straight onto Pearl's right hand. A scream ripped out of her. The pain was insane, like 1,000 needles made of fire stabbing her skin. The scorching liquid cooked her hand, the very fingers that held her entire future. The room exploded into chaos. Someone yelled for a doctor. Jericho lunged forward, forgetting his cane and almost wiping out as he scrambled to her. "Pearl!" His voice was shredded with panic. "Pearl!" But the server was gone. In the middle of all the madness, she ghosted, vanishing without a trace. The cameras, though, they see everything. And when Knox rewound the tape a few hours later, he knew her right away. Under that disguise was none other than Jasmine Whitmore. Constance and Jasmine had tailed them to New York. They knew the whole plan. They cooked up this hit from the very beginning. When the theater's doc checked Pearl's hand, his face went grim. "Second-degree burns," he said, his voice low. "The skin is already blistering and starting to peel." Her fingers were a swollen mess. Pearl stared at her bandaged hand, tears carving tracks down her face. Not from the burn, but from the gut punch she knew was coming next. "She cannot play today," the doctor told Jericho, whose face was pure shock. "If she even tries, the pressure could cause permanent nerve damage. She might lose control of her fingers for good. For a pianist, that's a career death sentence." Pearl squeezed her eyes shut as the tears flowed. 6 months of grinding, a lifetime of hoping. The Carnegie Hall dream just got wrecked by a pot of tea. Jericho knelt beside her, his hand trembling as he took her good one. He didn't say a word, just offered his presence, a shield against the disaster. But Pearl knew the brutal truth. He could love her forever, but he couldn't play the piano for her. He couldn't step into her dream. This was her fight, and it looked like she'd just been knocked out cold. 30 minutes before showtime, Pearl sat backstage, her eyes locked on her bandaged hand. The white gauze was a stark contrast to her skin, leaving her red, swollen fingertips exposed and shiny with ointment. A dull, pulsing fire burned in her hand, a sick reminder of the attack and everything on the line. Jericho was on his knees in front of her, his gray eyes filled with worry. He'd tossed his cane aside, forcing his weak legs to bend just so he could look her in the eye. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice soft but dead serious. "There will be other chances. Your hand needs to heal. Nobody would blame you for pulling out." Pearl was quiet for a second, staring at the bandage that trapped fingers that were once like water, now just throbbing with pain. Her mind flashed back through all the years that led her here. 27 years. My whole life, my mother called me fat, ugly, worthless, she said, her voice a low, hard rumble. My whole life, I just took it. She told me not to play, so I stopped. She locked me in the attic, so I stayed. She told me to marry you. And I did it. Pearl lifted her chin. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they were blazing with a fire Jericho had never seen before. "Today, for the first time in my life, I will not back down because of her," she declared, each word a shot of defiance. "She and Jasmine came all this way just to destroy my dream. If I give up now, they win. If I don't get on that stage, my 27 years in the dark were for absolutely nothing." Jericho looked into her eyes and saw a total transformation. The scared girl he met 6 months ago, the pawn in a sham marriage, was gone. In her place was a woman taking control of her life. "Your hand," he whispered, his voice full of concern. "It is still here," Pearl shot back, looking at the gauze. "I still have 10 fingers. I will play through the pain. It might not be perfect, but I will play." He was quiet, letting her words sink in. Then, slowly, painfully, he got to his feet, his mind made up. He grabbed his cane, his gray eyes shining with intense pride, and said, "Then you must play. I'll be watching from the front row." 15 minutes later, Pearl walked onto the stage. A blinding spotlight hit her, making her go blind for a moment. As her vision returned, she saw them. In the center rows sat the panel, 5 judges looking serious and impossible to read. And behind them, a crowd of critics, reporters, and music big shots, all there to judge her. And right there in the front row was Jericho. The second she appeared, he was on his feet, using his cane for support in a silent show of solidarity. He stood through his own pain, a lighthouse in the dark, making sure she knew he was with her, that he believed in her completely. Whispers spread through the audience as everyone noticed the bandage on Pearl's hand. She could feel their surprise, their curiosity, and under it all, their disbelief. A pianist with an injured hand. The idea was insane, but Pearl ignored it. She walked to the grand piano, sat down, and looked at the keys, a perfect mirror of the 27 years she'd just survived. She took one deep breath. Her hand settled on the keys, and the music started. The first few notes were shaky, almost fragile. A white-hot pain shot through her right hand, so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. Every press of a key was fresh hell. A note went wrong, then another. The pace was off, unsteady, and way too slow. But she kept playing. She thought of her father, of the 10 years he spent secretly recording her music. She thought of Madame Lorraine, the first person who ever heard her gift. She thought of Jericho, the man standing in the crowd who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. And then the music caught fire. It wasn't clean. There were moments it stumbled. There were notes that were just wrong. There were pauses where the pain almost won. But this wasn't about being technically perfect. This was the sound of a soul being torn wide open. Every note carried the weight of 27 years in the shadows. Every melody was the story of a girl called Worthless who refused to let her dreams die. Every chord was a scream from a heart that had been broken but absolutely refused to be silenced. Pearl played her own song, a piece born from pain and truth, from hopelessness and from love. She threw every last bit of herself into it, the agony and the happiness, the grief and the joy, her entire soul. As the final note vanished into the massive hall, Pearl sat perfectly still, her hand shaking like a leaf from a pain she couldn't control. She couldn't look up, terrified to see nothing but disappointment on the judges' faces. She was scared that everything she gave still wasn't enough. A heavy silence fell over the room, stretching on for so long Pearl thought her heart would stop. Then a single pair of hands started clapping, then another and another until the whole hall was on its feet. A roar of applause washed over her like a storm, the world telling her she had won. Pearl raised her head, her vision blurry with tears. She saw the judges standing, clapping for her. An older woman with silver hair was wiping her eyes. In the wings, Madame Lorraine was silently crying, her shoulders shaking, and in the front row, Jericho was standing and applauding, his gray eyes shining with unbelievable pride. The head judge, a tall, thin man in a sharp gray suit, walked onto the stage. He stopped in front of Pearl, his face serious, but his eyes were warm. "Miss Pearl," he said, his voice filling the now quiet room, "that was not the most flawless audition I have ever seen." Pearl felt her stomach drop, getting ready for the rejection. "But it was," he continued, a slow smile spreading across his face, "the most beautiful. For 30 years I've sat in this chair. I've heard countless musicians, but I've never seen someone play from their soul like you just did. Carnegie Hall should feel honored to have you." Pearl was a mess. The tears were a total flash flood she couldn't stop, a dam of held-back years finally bursting. Heavy footsteps echoed across the stage. Pearl glanced up and saw Jericho walking toward her. He ditched his cane, every step slow and painful, but his eyes were locked on her. He got to her, dropped to one knee, and just pulled her into his arms. Right there, in front of the whole world, he held her and whispered, "You did it. I am unbelievably proud of you." Pearl just buried her face in his shoulder, completely breaking down. In that one moment, she wasn't the rejected kid her mom abandoned. She wasn't just a stand-in. She was Pearl Crane, a musician heading for Carnegie Hall. And she was loved. The flight from New York to Las Vegas was 5 hours, but to Pearl, it was like a 10-minute power nap. She was out cold the whole time, head on Jericho's shoulder, her bandaged hand in her lap. The pain was still buzzing under the meds, but it had zero power over her now. She'd won. Carnegie Hall was on the schedule. By the time they rolled up to the Crane estate, the whole place was cloaked in darkness. Knox swung the door open for them, his face looking way more serious than usual as he said they had guests in the drawing room. Pearl walked into the massive hall, exhausted but on top of the world, and then she froze solid. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, was standing right in the middle of the room, with a ramrod-straight posture she had never seen before. He looked thinner than the last time she saw him on a video call, with dark circles under those gray-blue eyes that were just like hers. But something huge had shifted. The pushover she always knew was gone. replaced by the quiet steel of a man who'd finally made the biggest call of his life. "Father!" Pearl bolted toward him, throwing her arms around him, totally forgetting her injury, forgetting the pain. For the first time in 6 months, she was hugging him, and the tears started up again, even when she thought she was all cried out. "You promised you'd be here," she choked out. Gerald hugged his daughter back like his life depended on it. "I always keep my promises, kiddo. I'm just so sorry it took me this long." Jericho watched the whole scene from a distance, just leaning on his cane and saying nothing. As Pearl pulled away from her dad, Jericho moved forward and gave a small, respectful nod. "Mr. Whitmore, thanks for coming." Gerald's eyes locked with Jericho's, taking in the guy's pained but steady stance. He saw the way Jericho was looking at Pearl, his eyes just screaming adoration. "No!" Gerald shot back, his voice low but solid. "Thank you for protecting my daughter. I heard all about New York, the audition, and what Constance and Jasmine cooked up." Knox slid back into the room, his voice cutting through the sweet moment. "Sir, they're here from New York. They're under guard in the East Hall, waiting." Jericho's face hardened like concrete as he gave the nod. "Bring them here." A few moments later, security marched Constance and Jasmine into the drawing room. Their snotty attitudes had completely evaporated. Jasmine's hair was a wreck. Her fancy dress was a wrinkled mess from the long trip. Constance tried to keep her Ice Queen act together, but pure panic was flashing in her eyes when she saw Gerald standing with Pearl. "Gerald!" she sputtered, totally floored. "How could you?" Gerald didn't even give her a reply. He just stayed next to his daughter, spine straight, his face a total blank. Knox stepped up, plopped a laptop on a table, and hit play on a video. The screen lit up with backstage footage from the theater, showing a uniformed Jasmine deliberately tripping and dumping a pot of boiling tea right on Pearl's hand. Next up were screenshots of texts between Constance and Jasmine, mapping out their entire scheme to sabotage the audition. Constance, though, wasn't ready to fold. "It was a mistake!" she shrieked, her voice getting all shrill. "There's no proof. This is all made up." "We have the footage," Jericho said, his voice like pure ice. "We have more than one witness. We have your text messages, and we have an official statement from theater security that Miss Jasmine got backstage using a fake ID." Constance's face went ghost white. She spun on Pearl, her terror instantly flipping into nasty rage. "You!" she screeched, her face twisting into something ugly. "Who do you think you are? You're just a fat, pathetic girl. A total disgrace to this family. You might have everyone else fooled, but I see you. You are nothing." "That is enough, Constance." Gerald stepped right between his wife and his daughter. His voice wasn't yelling, but it hit the room with the power of 27 years of finally being broken. Constance froze, her eyes wide with shock. Gerald had never, ever stood up to her. In 27 years, he had always backed down, always gave in, always let her run the show. 27 years, Gerald started, every word like a small cut. "For 27 years, I watched you treat my own daughter like garbage. I kept my mouth shut because I was a coward. I was afraid of you. I was scared of losing this house, my job, all of it. But that ends tonight." He stared straight into Constance's eyes, and for the first time ever, she was the one who flinched. "Pearl is not fat. Pearl is not ugly, and Pearl is not useless," Gerald announced, his voice shaking with emotion but with zero weakness. "Pearl is the most amazing daughter a father could ever hope for. She has a talent you were too busy to ever see. She has a heart you were never worthy of getting love from. And I am so deeply ashamed it took me so long to stand up for her." Pearl stood right by her father, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of freedom, payment for 27 years of waiting, finally paid in full. She walked up to Constance, her voice as calm as a still lake. "I can see the colors of truth, Mother," she said, "and yours has always been black as a bottomless pit, as black as a night with no moon. I listened to it for 27 years, thinking it was the only color the world had for me." She paused, her eyes locked on the woman who gave her life just to ruin it for 27 years. "But I was totally wrong. There are so many bright colors in this world. The turquoise of love, the honey gold of truth, the silver of hope. You just blocked them from me, wanting me to live in your shadow." "I am not broken," Pearl stated, every word a quiet verdict. "I never was. I am just different, and different does not mean wrong." Constance stood there, pale and silent, beaten for the first time by the daughter she always looked down on. Jericho stepped into the gap between them, his voice like a winter frost. "Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Jasmine, you have 48 hours to get out of Las Vegas." His brutal gray eyes scanned them. "I will use all of my power to make it happen. Nobody will hire you. Nobody will do business with you. Nobody will even know you. The two of you will just disappear from the high society you used to rule. You tried to break my wife? Newsflash, you're gonna break yourselves." Security dragged a pathetic-looking Constance and Jasmine out of the room, their pride totally gone. The door clicks shut. Jericho turns to Knox. "Get my mother." Knox nods and splits. 10 minutes later, Eleanor Crane waltzes in, playing dumb like she missed the whole drama. But Pearl could feel the ice in her voice. Jericho didn't waste time. "Mother, I know about the bomb, and I know you knew everything." Eleanor didn't even deny it. "I thought Bradley would be a stronger boss." "You were a wreck after the accident. I did what I had to for the family name." "You let them try to kill me," Jericho shot back, his words hitting like bullets. "I never gave the order," she fired back. "But you knew," he pushed, "and you did nothing." The room went dead silent. Pearl could feel the raw pain he was holding back. Betrayed by his own mom when he was at his weakest. That's a hit no armor can stop. "You're leaving this estate," Jericho commanded, his voice pure steel. "You'll live in a nice house, but you're done here. Your power at Crane Holdings is officially revoked. Bradley will be dealt with separately." He paused, looking his mother straight in the eyes. "And if I have children, you will never know them." Eleanor's face went completely white. It was the worst possible sentence he could give, way more brutal than taking away her money or power. To be cut off from the family's future, stripped of the right to be a grandmother, forever blocked from the lives of grandkids she would never get to hold. She stood there frozen for a long second, her face a mask of pure shock, then turned and walked out without making a sound. When she was finally gone, Jericho let out a huge breath, like a 1,000-pound weight had just been lifted off his soul. Pearl went to him, taking his hand. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Jericho actually cracked a smile, the first one since this whole mess started. "I am now," he said. "Justice served cold." 2 months after the takedown, Pearl is backstage at Carnegie Hall, heart pounding like a drum solo. 2 years ago, she was just a substitute pawn in the Crane game. Now she's the headliner at the biggest venue in the world. 3,000 people are out there, waiting just for her. Lena Santos fusses with Pearl's dress, her hands shaking more than Pearl's. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Pearl glanced at her right hand. The burn scar was still there, but she wasn't hiding it anymore. "That's not a flaw. It's a freaking trophy." "I am ready," she confirmed. The stage lights blast on. Pearl walks out, an absolute vision, moving like a queen claiming her kingdom. The grand piano waits for her, lit up like a holy grail. 3,000 people went completely silent. You could feel the hype in the air, but she felt zero fear. She scanned the front row and saw her crew. Her dad, Gerald, was already a mess of tears before a single note was played. Knox and Lena sat there, beaming with pride. And then, the ultimate plot twist. Jericho was standing. No wheelchair, no cane. He was standing on his own 2 feet for the first time. 2 years of brutal physio, of pure grit. And on this night, he stood tall for his queen. Pearl sat at the piano, took a breath, and unleashed her masterpiece. Colors of Truth. But it wasn't just a diss track on her past. It was a victory anthem. It was about finding true allies and hope when everything seemed trashed. The whole hall felt like it was exploding with color. Every note was a brushstroke of her journey. She poured every bit of her soul into it. The pain, the wins, the love from the real ones. As the last note faded, total silence. 1 second, 2, then 3,000 people jumped to their feet as one. The applause was like a thunderstorm, a massive ovation for her comeback. Pearl stayed at the piano, tears streaming down as she looked to the front row. She saw Jericho heading for the stage. He walked slow, deliberate, but totally steady. He was walking on his own, up the stairs, straight to her. "You walked without a cane," Pearl whispered, stunned. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were shining. "I had to stand tall when I came to you," Jericho replied. They hugged it out in front of 3,000 people as the lights blazed down, the rest of the world just vanishing. The applause was a tidal wave, but all Pearl heard was his heartbeat. Later, backstage, Jericho took her hand. "What color is my voice to you now?" he asked. Pearl looked at him, the answer crystal clear. "Honey gold," she said with a real smile. "And what does that mean?" he asked. "It means you're totally in love." Jericho leaned in and kissed her. "I've always loved you." "I know," she said. "I could always hear it." A few months later, their world changed again. Gerald Jr. The first kid for Pearl and Jericho arrived one spring morning. He got his dad's gray eyes and his mom's brown hair. And get this. Whenever the baby cried, Pearl played the piano and he would instantly go quiet, his eyes glued to his mom, like he could see the music too. Grandpa Gerald moved into their Las Vegas penthouse and started the Whitmore Music Academy, a free school for poor kids, completely funded by Jericho. He spent his days teaching kids how to find their own A game. Jericho completely flipped his life around. He cut all ties to his shady businesses, turning Crane Holdings into a legit corporate empire. When Pearl asked why, he just looked at their son. He said he wouldn't raise Gerald Jr. in a world where his dad had a target on his back. He wanted to be a father who grew old, not one in a box before his kid could walk. As for Constance and Jasmine, they were stuck in a tiny apartment, exiled from the high life. No one would hire them. No one would deal with them. Nobody even looked at them on the street. They lived off a small allowance, counting pennies, and whenever Constance turned on the TV, she saw Pearl's face, the daughter she called a useless burden, now playing for thousands, a global superstar. Meanwhile, Eleanor Crane lived alone in a mansion far from Vegas. She had all the money in the world, but she was completely isolated. She had a grandson she was forbidden to ever meet. She only saw pictures of him in magazines. It was the coldest sentence for a woman who was willing to sacrifice her own son. One night, with the baby and Grandpa asleep, Pearl was playing a quiet tune. Jericho came in, walking perfectly, and sat beside her. They didn't talk. They just sat there, letting the music fill the space between them. It was just the melody, the quiet, and their love. In a world full of fakes, Pearl had learned to hear what was real. She once thought her life was meant to be black, the color of cruelty and being unwanted. She was so wrong. Her world was full of insane colors she was just starting to see. The honey gold of real love, the turquoise of truth, the silver of hope. And the sickest truth of all was hearing "I love you" from the man the world had written off. The guy who stood up out of his wheelchair for her, who proved that being different didn't mean you were less. It meant you were a legend. The end.
From a deeper perspective, their story is not merely about romance, revenge, or mafia power. It is about what happens when two damaged lives meet at the exact point where despair should have won. Pearl and Jericho were both raised by systems that measured human worth through utility. Pearl was valued by appearance and obedience. Jericho was valued by dominance and effectiveness. Once both failed those standards, each became disposable in the eyes of their world. What makes their connection meaningful is that neither of them was saved by fantasy. They were saved by recognition. Pearl did not magically erase Jericho's trauma. Jericho did not simply rescue Pearl from her past. Instead, they became witnesses to each other's pain, and sometimes being truly witnessed is the first step toward becoming whole. There is also a larger theme at work here, the cycle of violence. Jericho came from a world where fear passed for loyalty and emotional numbness passed for masculinity. Pearl came from a home where cruelty disguised itself as correction. Both were trained to endure lovelessness. Both were taught that tenderness was either weakness or a luxury. Their relationship breaks that pattern, not immediately, not perfectly, but deliberately. Pearl's music becomes symbolic here. It is not just talent, it is her recovered identity. Every note she plays pushes back against the years she spent being silenced. And Jericho's gradual return to life is not just physical rehabilitation, it is moral and emotional rehabilitation. He begins by surviving, then moves toward feeling, then chooses transformation. The lesson is simple but powerful. Healing begins when someone stops asking, "How useful are you?" and starts asking, "Who are you when nobody is hurting you?" That is where love becomes revolutionary.